In the last video, we got our basic form validation working. Now it's time to convert our image that we got from the photo picker to a CKAsset so we can then create our record to send up to CloudKit. Okay, so in our extensions folder, we're going to create an extension on UIImage, just like we had an extension on CKAsset, right? If you look at it, this says convert to UIImage. We're going to do something very similar to convert the CKAsset to the UIImage. So I'm actually just going to copy and paste this because I'm too lazy to type. Do right click, new file on the extensions, and we'll do new Swift file, hit UIImage plus ext, right? That's how I name my extensions. And then we will paste all this, but I don't need all that, and UIImage. Okay, let's talk about the big picture about what's going to happen here. The initializer for a CKAsset takes in a file URL. Let me show you. Say let asset equal CKAsset, and then we'll initialize that. You see, the only initializer is a file URL. So what this file URL is essentially an address that points to where some data is at in our app. And every app has local storage that you can write to. I mean, as long as there's enough room on the overall phone storage. So big picture, what we're going to do is take our UIImage, create a unique URL or address to point to into our app where we want to put that data. And then once we have that address, the URL, we're going to write the data to that address, right? So now we have a file URL that has our image data at it. And then as you can see, when we initialize the CKAsset, we're going to pass in that file URL to create our CKAsset, and that's what we're going to return. Okay, so that was the big picture summary. Let's write it, and then I'll summarize that again to really drive the point home. Okay, haven't said that in a while. Usually I say that a lot in my courses, to drive the point home. Okay, anyway, we want to write a function here, convert to CKAsset, and that returns a CKAsset, of course. So here we will, and this is actually going to be optional, sorry, because throughout this process, there's many points where this can fail. So rather than popping up different errors to the user, we're just going to handle the overall case when it returns nil back in our app, because our user doesn't care if we couldn't find the right file directory, right? We don't have to be that specific with the user. So we'll return nil just to get Xcode to shut up. So I'm going to, well, let's make this a little bigger here, and then I'm going to comment our steps here to really spell out what we're going to do. So the first step is get our app's base document directory URL. That's going to be the first step. And then once we have that URL, we're going to append some unique identifier for our profile image. This could be like a UUID. We're actually going to keep it kind of generic because we're only saving one thing. If we were saving multiple images and we wanted to find that specific image, we would handle this differently. But you'll see we're just going to basically append avatar to the URL because there's only going to be one for us. So once we append that avatar to whatever URL we get, we are going to write the image data to the location the address points to. And then once we've written the data, we're going to create our CKAsset with that file URL that will now have data at it because we just wrote to it. Okay, so those are the 4 steps that we're going to do. So let's do it step by step. So we'll do guard let URL path equal file manager .default.urls, and you'll see there's plural, right? So URLs, we're going to do document directory. Again, this is where you can write local storage to, and then in user domain mask, right? The user's home directory, the place to install user's personal items. So that's where we want to go. Now, like I pointed out, this URLs is plural. So it's going to return an array of URLs, but the first one is the one we are looking for, which again is the overall document directory URL for our app. Anytime you use first on an array, that always returns an optional, which is why we did the guard let. So if this comes back nil, we will return nil for our CKAsset. And if you wanted to be friendly to the developers, in case something goes wrong, you can, print document directory URL came back nil. We're not showing this to the user because they don't care about that, but it'll help your developers debug by putting these print statements in here. Again, this is stylistic. Some people like these print statements, some people don't. I do want to point it out, again, just for the cleanliness of our code and for the instruction. I will go ahead and not do that, but just know that is a nice thing to do for developers using your code base. Okay, so we have our URL path, for our app. That's our base URL. Again, that's just for our app. So we want to append some sort of unique identifier for our profile image to the end of that URL, right? It would be like, seanallen.co/resume. right? That /resume is what we're adding, where SeanAllen.co is the base URL, is essentially what's going on here. So we'll do let file URL equal, and we'll do URL path, and you can do .append path component, right? So we have the URL path. We're just gonna append a component on there, and it is a string, and the string we're gonna do is selected avatar image. And we're being a little more specific than just avatar. So selected avatar image will be what we're going to append to the URL. And this is going to be the location of our data for the image. And like I said, if you wanted very specific URLs, say you had multiple images you want to choose from, maybe you would assign a UUID and put the UUID as the appended path component. That way it's unique to that image. We don't care about that. We only want one avatar image for our user, so this is fine. Okay, now here is where we need to create our image data. And we did this before in our photo picker, and I actually decided to move the compression here. I felt like that was better, and we'll do that real quick. So we need to do let image data equal JPEG data compression quality. And I did find a bug to let you know. If you remember again, when I had Jason's profile at 4.7 megabytes and that was being compressed by 75%, we talked about that in a previous video. Well, I found a bug in my beta app where I didn't do JPEG data, I did PNG data. So as you may know, PNGs are a lot larger than JPEGs. So this is why my images were a lot larger. So the fix that I'm going to do here is, again, now do JPEG data compression quality. And real quick, what was happening essentially in my beta app, just for, I don't know, extra knowledge, is sure, I was getting the UIImage as a JPEG from the photo picker, but when I went to convert it to my CKAsset, because I had a very similar extension in my beta app, I was converting it to a PNG at this point. So naturally, that's what made my files larger. So just a little gotcha, maybe a little extra knowledge here, but that was a bug I had in my beta app. So instead of compressing down to 10% like we did before, I am gonna go back to that 25%. But before we forget, now that we're doing the compression here when we convert to a CKAsset, let's go to our photo picker. So views, custom views, photo picker. And then, okay, so this whole compressed image data thing, again, we're doing that. Let's get rid of that. And then now the image we're getting back is just image, which is, again, right here, right? We're unwrapping that optional. So basically, we're just not doing the compression here. Keep the raw image. Where we're doing the compression is now when we convert it to a CKAsset, this is what we're doing here. And like I mentioned in the photo picker video, this, we force unwrapped it there. We're actually not going to force unwrap it here. We're going to handle it. We're going to do guard let, well, we're going to kind of handle it, else return nil. Again, we're not giving a specific error message. If you wanted to print out a statement that was specific for the developers, by all means do that. But here we're just returning nil for our CKAsset if something goes wrong converting our image to data. Okay, so now that we have our data, we need to write that data to the file URL that we created up here. And then once we have the data at that file URL, we're going to initialize and return our CKAsset that we created from the data at that file URL. Okay, so the first step here is to do image data.write to, and you're going to see this throws. So if it throws, we're going to need to do try catch. So let's go back and do that. So do, and we'll do image, oh no, got to mark it try. Try image data.write to, and you see this takes in a URL. Well, we have our file URL up here, right? So file URL. So again, this is us writing that data in our local storage to the URL that we created up here. And again, it is our app's base URL, which is kind of gibberish, you'll see. And then we just appended selected avatar image to the end of that URL for a more specific address where we're writing this data to. Okay, so if this is successful, right, well, it's telling us I need to handle the failure case if it's not successful, right? That's the third part of the do try catch. If it's not successful, again, we're just returning nil for our CKAsset. If it is successful, this is where we want to return CKAsset, right? And then the whole reason we did all this, right? The CKAsset takes a file URL to create from, and we have that up there, file URL. And then of course, now we can get rid of this return nil because we only had that in there to shut up Xcode. Okay, so I know I explained that along the way, but now that everything's written out, one more quick once over, because we can't really test this until the next video when we're actually creating our image. Then we'll see if this worked or not. But again, one last, well, I'll delete these comments. I mean, you can feel free to leave them in. I usually do that when, just for my process, like when I'm trying to figure something out, right? Like if I've built something 100 times and I know how it works, I don't comment out the steps. But when I'm trying to figure out something for the first time as I'm learning, I'll usually do that. I'll do the research, figure out the steps I need to do, comment it out, then write it step by step. And then if there's any refactoring that needs to be done, that's how I'll do it. So that's how I tackle like new topics. Just a little side note. So again, let's walk through this. We are converting the image to CKAsset. So we're just going to call this right on the image. And step one is to get our base URL that is assigned to our app, right? This is how we get that. Step two, once we have the base URL, go ahead and append our custom identifier. Again, selected avatar image. So now we have our URL, we have our address essentially. And then here we're going to create our data from the image, and we moved our compression here. So we're compressing our image by 75%. So now that we have our data and our URL, which again is our address, now we need to write that data to that address. And if that is successful, now we will create a CKAsset from the data at that address, and we're returning that. So when we call image.convert to CKAsset, if everything goes well, we'll return the CKAsset. So that is our conversion. And in the next video, we're going to put this to work when we create a DDG profile record from the profile screen data and then send it up to CloudKit. All right, let's go.